3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
There is no other institution that has the ability, uniquely,
without a heritage, every generation starts over.
Ask not
to remind the current regime
what your country.
We, the people, tell the government what it is allowed to do.
To get back in their box and stay there.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
From the Heritage Foundation, this is Heritage Explains.
You are hearing the sound of air raid sirens over Tel Aviv, Israel, earlier this week. Over the city's skyline, the contrails of Iranian rockets and intercepting Israeli missiles crisscrossed the night. On Friday, Israel initiated Operation Rising Lion, conducting airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and military command centers. The strikes led to at least 75 Iranian deaths and significant infrastructure damage, including oil refineries and missile launchers. Iran responded with a large-scale missile and drone assault on Israel, targeting over 150 military and intelligence sites. The strikes resulted in at least 14 Israeli fatalities and over 400 injuries. Israel claimed to have damaged or destroyed 150 military and intelligence sites, including missile launchers and air defense systems. Here to talk about the implications of this attack and how we might expect this to change the situation in the Middle East is Robert Greenway, director of the Allison Center for National Security, here at the Heritage Foundation. Rob Greenway, welcome back to Heritage Explains.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So we have you here today to talk about the developments that are going on, unfortunately, over in the Middle East. Can you give us an account of what's happened, what's changed in the situation over the last couple of days?
Well, all of this was really initiated by the revelation, not surprisingly, that Iran was in fact pursuing a nuclear weapon and has gotten to the threshold. All of that enabled by the hundreds of billions of dollars that came in the form of appeasement in the Biden and Obama administrations. And having gotten to the threshold, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Organization that monitors the program, came to the conclusion and issued a very unique and unprecedented censure, capturing the fact that they had in fact developed the infrastructure that could not be accounted in any other way, and they were not being responsive to questions and addressing some of the discrepancies in the available information. And so Israel determined that it had to act before Iran could obtain possession of a nuclear weapon, which it has sworn to use against its enemies, in this case, Israel and the United States. And so in acting, Israel had seized the initiative, surprised Iran, and in a very short period of time managed to do three critical things, which it's expanded over the last couple of days. The first is to be able to strike at regime leadership. So the command and control, the individuals responsible for making decisions and supporting the supreme leader in making decisions, were decapitated. Now we're up to 40 individuals that fill critical roles in their military and security apparatus have been killed, as well as experts in the nuclear scientists and programs that support the nuclear weapons development programs have all been killed. Second, they managed to take out all of the Iranian air defense systems that remained after October's strikes that Israel took after responding to a ballistic missile attack. Third, they've managed to gain air supremacy and air superiority as a result of taking out the air defenses and command and control facilities and individuals responsible. The last is they've been able to begin to attrit the retaliatory capacity, the ballistic missiles that Iran has long developed in order to threaten Israel and its neighbors in the region and ultimately develop an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of delivering a nuclear payload against the United States. And having done that, the strikes against Israel have begun to abate. And it's not clear as to whether they no longer possess the inventory to do it or that Israel has taken away the means to deliver it. And in either case, those have diminished significantly. Now we're at the point where the United States is determining whether or not it needs to be involved. And the reason essentially comes down to nuclear structures that are built to protect the centrifuge cascades in hardened, deeply buried underground facilities, of which there are two. one at Fordo and one at Natanz. One is being used and one could be used, both of which are buried some 300 feet underground, are reinforced concrete structures built over decades, and are beyond Israel's capacity to defeat from the air with conventional weapons. The capability to do that exists only in the U.S. inventory. And so now President Trump and the National Security Team, thankfully, are assessing the situation and judging what's required. But at the end, if you take a step back, where we're at is the end of diplomatic resolution to the Iranian nuclear question. The Israelis have acted and done so decisively and effectively that they're at the cusp of eliminating that capability. And so not only did the Iranians reject President Trump's offer to negotiate an end, they also missed the window of opportunity. And so now it appears that the military solution will have ended the Iranian nuclear ambitions, but may require U.S. support to complete the action.
Of course, it's very difficult to predict these things. But as you're looking at the situation, do you think that there is likelihood that America will engage militarily here?
I think the odds, certainly in the last 24 hours, the president's comments to the press, his tweets on X and on Truth Social, all indicate, I think, that he's moving in a direction and he's sympathetic to the argument. And I think he recognizes, most importantly, one, it may be required to effectively end it. The worst case scenario here is where after Israel effectively neuters Iran, that the capacity remains intact underground so that they would resurrect it and become a threat later. So I think he's sympathetic to the argument that the United States can play a role here in closing that door completely so that Iran no longer has possession of a nuclear weapon, his primary and often repeated policy objective, which is the right one. I think also that the circumstances now are clear enough to indicate, too, that Iran could never drag the United States into a war. It can't defend itself against Israel, let alone the United States. That's not on offer. There never were plans to invade Iran, nor is that required under the circumstances. This could be a surgical strike and one for which the United States is well equipped. But there is not a scenario in which we'd be dragged into an endless war. In reality, this ends a war that started in 1979 that the Islamic Republic has been in against the United States and Israel. And I think after doing this, we're going to be looking at an entirely different region for the first time in decades absent the Iranian threat.
So assuming that there is military action in Iran that eliminates the nuclear program and we would assume deposes or greatly diminishes the power of the current Iranian regime, do we have some sense of what governance in Iran would look like post such an action?
No, I think it's impossible to predict. And look, the Iranian Revolution of 79 and the only transition of power they had in 1989 were completely unpredictable. The Iranians didn't know what the outcome was going to be. Impossible for us to know. I think what we do know are you're looking at really one of two outcomes, both of which are better than the current. Right now you have a maniacal state sponsor of terrorism led by a religious fanatic committed to the destruction of Israel and the United States. The other two alternatives as a result of this series of actions taken by Israel and potentially the United States would leave Iran probably without the rule of Supreme Leader Khamenei and his ilk. What it could be is Iran returns to its democratic roots, which predate the 79 revolution. There are those that believe that the Shah's son, now living in the United States, could potentially return to power and organize a democratic movement. And there is some sympathy, as far as we know, on the ground inside of Iran for that. There are a number of active resistance groups, but the repression of the state has prevented them from organizing inside. They have organized externally and outside of Iran, and they've been hunted down mercilessly. So there is broad support for a change in governing structure inside of Iran, insofar as we know. It would undoubtedly take time for this to take shape and materialize. But they have historically also been popularly still, the United States amazingly is still, even though the regime may hate the United States and Israel, the United States is incredibly popular on the ground among average Iranians. And certainly there's a large diaspora which is in the United States and sympathetic to the United States. So there's every reason to believe that we would be in a better position. However, if the alternative was collapse, it still would be preferable in this sense. They would no longer have the resources to threaten Israel or the United States. And so even if it takes time for them to sort out what a new governing structure would look like, they would no longer have the capacity to threaten the United States and Israel and our neighbors and interests in the region. And that ultimately, I think, is the better day that we can envision now after this.
So, of course, currently Israel is engaged in the war in Gaza. What are the implications for this conflict? Can Israel fight both of these at the same time?
Well, right now they are. And they are because the conflict in Gaza is in its very final stages, requires some, but not all of Israel's military might. And it is predominantly a ground fight. And so what that means is the fight in Iran has been from the air, has been an intelligence operation and a battle for air supremacy, which Israel has won. No ground forces required for that. So right now, you've got different elements of the Israeli defense forces engaged. And again, the combat in Iran is the priority and the largest resource commitment. The conflict in Gaza no longer requires significant percentage of the Israeli force. And again, it will, without doubt, end in the very near term. And having concluded the conflict with Iran successfully, it puts Israel in a much stronger regional position.
So obviously the days that are coming will be very unpredictable. What is your advice for folks who are watching this conflict unfold?
I think two things. First is they should be remarkably encouraged. One, that this threat has been confronted. We're no longer living in a world in which Israel and the United States are concerned about the development of a nuclear weapon in the hands of a maniacal terrorist regime, and that is a good thing. Second, that this is not a piece of paper or a guarantee that has often been violated by Iran is the only thing that stands between us and that reality. This could be a definitive end to the nuclear program. It could even be a definitive end to Iran as a threat. And both of those things are remarkably encouraging. And what that ultimately means is the region could be shaped in a way in which we would no longer be confronted with the ever-present reality of a conflict in the Middle East. And lastly, I would say, again, there's no scenario envisioned in which the U.S. would be drawn into a ground war of any kind or an endless war that we've seen in the Middle East previously, and certainly that I've participated in. And those are encouraging things. So for the first time in decades, I think I can say I'm optimistic about the trajectory, regardless of how uncertain it may be in the near term.
Rob Greenway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to Rob Greenway for his contribution to today's episode. You can follow Rob on X at @RC_Greenway. And you can find more of Rob's work on Ukraine, Iran, China, and other conflicts that affect American interests across the world at heritage.org. Thanks as always to you for listening to Heritage Explains. You can reach out to us with thoughts, questions, or suggestions at heritageexplains@heritage.org. Take care, and we'll see you next week.
Heritage Explains is written and produced by Mark Gagne, Lauren Evans, and John Popp.